Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Well, the last few days in Ottawa have been stunning. We've seen a campaign to undermine Mr. Bill Morneaus, who was the finance minister. He subsequently resigned that post, and in his place, Prime Minister Trudeau has appointed Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland to the role of Finance Minister of the Canadian government. A lot has happened. Obviously, a lot of the context has been political, but there has been an economic and business context as well, and we want to unpack those issues in particular. Joining me today is Mr. Joe Oliver, who is a financial advisor and financier now, but of course was the finance minister for the government of Canada in the last couple of years of Stephen Harper's mandate. Joe Oliver, thank you for joining us here today.
Great to be with you, Tony.
So first question first, what do you make of Mr. Morneaus' resignation?
Well, there have been so many stories, and some of them, I guess, might be true, but it looks like he was pushed out. They didn't want to identify the WE scandal as the reason for it because it would have raised a question: if the Minister of Finance has to go, why wouldn't the Prime Minister also be obliged to leave, since what he did was at least as bad? In fact, he was part of the decision, and I gather there's been a data dump, and there's some substantiation for that particular story, which is certainly no surprise. I don't think to anyone. So the WE scandal was part of it for sure. We're told there was a doctrinal policy dispute, and that somehow Bill Morneaus was the exemplar of fiscal rectitude, and he just couldn't take it anymore. Now, this is after 5 years, of course, during which they accumulated $100 billion in additional debt prior to COVID hitting. And as you know, accumulating debt during a period of growth is not a prudent thing to do. And it weakens you when an inevitable downturn occurs. No one anticipated COVID-19. Everyone knew there would be a downturn eventually because business cycle is not dead. So we were weakened going into it. And now it appears, or we're told, that the Prime Minister wants to continue his profligate ways, continue spending, even though this year's deficit is going to reach $343 billion or more, likely more, and the debt is going to exceed $1 trillion. That's just the federal debt. So the storyline is that Bill Morneaus was trying to push back a little bit, and the Prime Minister didn't like this. He viewed, as I guess a lot of far left viewers and some not so far left are hoping that the COVID-19 crisis will somehow give them license to create the Great Reset, where we're going to be benefiting from even more government, even more spending, and even more debt.
And I want to unpack that as the show moves on. Just in the minute before we have the break, first impressions of Chrystia Freeland.
Well, look, Chrystia Freeland is a bright person, but she doesn't have vast economic or capital markets or financial background. She was a journalist for a time, but she's got a lot of political experience, and she did work on the free trade agreement with the United States. So I think she'll be able to handle the job. The much bigger issue is where she and the Prime Minister want to see the economy going. And it doesn't look like, if there's a need for restraint, and it certainly looks like there is a need for restraint, that she's likely to be the one to be there to exert it.
Well, let's really start to unpack this after the break. We're joined with Joe Oliver, former Finance Minister for Canada. Stay with us. We're just getting into this topic as we go along. Thank you. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. With me today is former Finance Minister Joe Oliver. Well, of course, now is the time to talk about the elephant in the room, which is Justin Trudeau's plans for the economy during and post-COVID. There's been a lot of leaks about how this is going to be the time for the Great Reset, that it's going to involve massive changes to economic supports for individuals, massive changes to the green supports for the economy, and shifting the economy to a green economy, almost like the Green New Deal debate in the United States. Joe Oliver, what have you heard about this, and what can you tell us about it?
Well, we know that quite a few people, not only in Canada, but in the United States, in Europe, and some around the world, view the current crisis, the current shuttering of the economy and high unemployment and massive debt as somehow a justification for doing even more. And they view this as an opportunity. Never let a crisis, never miss an opportunity that can flow from a crisis. So they're proposing policies which would result in more government intervention, larger spending, more social support, and massive support for renewable energy and responding to what they view as a climate emergency. So somehow we are to believe that when things are bad, that's a time to introduce policies which are going to make things even worse. And I don't really exaggerate, because a lot of these policies would have hurt a thriving economy. They're going to be much more damaging to an economy which is staggering from a shutdown and is burdened by massive debt obligations. The question here in Canada is just how far the Prime Minister wants to go. And a secondary question is, will the new Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, be a voice of moderation, reason, some minimum fiscal prudence? And, we don't know anything about her fiscal ideas, as she hasn't spoken out about them. But we do know she's been parroting a lot of the virtue signaling that we've heard from the Prime Minister about a Green New Deal, and maybe not in those words, but supporting renewable energy and, of course, helping people. So it goes to the issue of how long these support programs will last, how massive they'll be, how extensive they'll be, and how much the government is prepared to support uncompetitive green policies, which not only has implications for our financial situation, but also for national unity.
Well, I've got to ask you this. Maybe it's more of a personal question, but you've been in the seat of the finance minister, obviously, and you've had discussions with a prime minister leading up to a budget. What's that like? Does the finance minister have the ability and the obligation to have a meaningful debate with the prime minister about priorities? Is that what the pre-budget process is at least partially about?
Well, it is about bringing forward a fiscal plan that works for the country. Fortunately, I didn't have any light in my views between myself and the Prime Minister. We were, we saw things in the same way, and I wasn't a tortured soul that was somehow dragged to a balanced budget. I was very much in favor of it, and that was the Prime Minister's opinion. Ultimately, of course, the Prime Minister decides, and a budget is presented to cabinet, as you know. But during that time, there's extensive consultation with caucus, with opposition members, with a wide variety of stakeholders, with, of course, the public service, and there's tremendous input. A lot of it, of course, is directed at new programs, many worthwhile, but not all of them affordable. And the finance minister becomes Dr. No at a certain point. It doesn't acquire a lot of friends, although everyone's friendly with the finance minister prior to the budget. Immediately after the budget, things take a different turn, as you might imagine.
We'll be right back with Joe. We'll be right back with you right after the break, but hold that thought. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with former Finance Minister Joe Oliver. Joe, we were talking before the break about some of the pressures on the Finance Minister, pressures from caucus, from other parliamentarians, and so on. What sort of pressures do you see for Chrystia Freeland as she revs up in her role and obviously has to produce at some point a budget document of some sort?
Well, she's going to have enormous pressure. I was going to say in the last segment that what you have to have is a target. What do you want to achieve? Now, in our case, it was pretty clear. We were determined and it was responsible to have a balanced budget, and we produced one. And so we had to fit the spending into that parameter. When you don't have that restraint, then, of course, it can become a moving target. But she should have in mind just how big a deficit she wants to tolerate, and how big should it be for the country, with hopefully a goal in mind down the road to bring us into balance. Not immediately, that's not possible right now, but eventually. So the types of pressure she's going to encounter, first of all, are in respect to the support programs relating to COVID. We know that there had to be support for businesses that the government effectively required to close, and people who were thrown out of work as a result. And so as the economy starts to open again, not everyone is going to be back at work full time, and there's going to be a need for some support. The question is, how much support should there be, and how many different groups should be covered? So that's going to be a tremendous point of pressure from a lot of outside groups, and I'm sure some of her cabinet colleagues, and potentially, I wouldn't say potentially, almost certainly from the Prime Minister's office, the PMO, and the Prime Minister himself. So that's one form of pressure. The other is whether it is in fact the intention, as we're increasingly hearing, to have a so-called grand reset and actually move in the direction deliberately of more spending because of a desire to make government a bigger factor in the economy and people's lives. So how she relates to that is going to be crucial for her and for where the country is going. But I'm not tremendously optimistic, frankly. I think there's a real danger that things will get even more out of hand. On the other hand, you could argue that having appointed Chrystia Freeland as the Minister of Finance, he simply can't afford to fire her now. That would be catastrophic. So she has some degree of power in this asymmetrical relationship, whether she wants to use it, whether she's attuned enough to economic issues to identify the problems. Those are some of the big questions.
We've got a minute to go before the break, but are there particular groups that she should be listening to? Economic groups, business groups, advocacy groups? What's your experience?
Sure. Well, what she should do is listen very broadly to a wide variety of groups. Now, she has her favorite groups already, so that those aren't the ones we have to worry about her missing. I just saw in the newspaper today that the Dan Kelly, the head of the Small Business Association, didn't have a meeting with the former Minister of Finance, Bill Morneaus, and he said that's the first time in several decades that a finance minister hasn't met with him, which is kind of shocking because small business accounts for half the economy or more. I personally met with him numerous times, and that's of course what should happen. We want to know, as a government, what various economic drivers are concerned about. And so you meet with everyone. You don't necessarily buy into their story completely. You don't accept everything that they give everything to them that they want, but you've got to listen to them and understand where they're coming from, and then make decisions. So you consult very broadly, and that includes, of course, businesses and every business sector, including the resource sector.
Right.
And people from who are representing social groups who have every right to be represented.
And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. With me is former Finance Minister Joe Oliver. Thank you for joining us today, Joe.
Glad to be here.
So, based on what you see and now your post-political business experience, do you want to get out your crystal ball and talk about where the economy is headed? Is it too soon to say? But let's try our predictive abilities today.
Well, this is a real tough one. Stepping back, there is a bit of disconnect between the stock market and the economy. The stock market is looking for a V recovery after the sharp downturn, a sharp upturn, and of course there will be an upturn, and a lot of the numbers are getting encouraging, but very few economists or business people think it's going to revert back to what it was in the time it took to effectively close down. I think it's going to take time for people to get back to work, for companies to reopen. There are going to be thousands of companies that will have gone bankrupt by then, and so it's not going to be a V. Is it a W with a resurgence of COVID? Is it a swoosh? That is to say, a recovery, but over a longer period, less market increase. We don't exactly we don't know, but there's reason for some caution. It's going to take a while to get back to where we were economically, and so government policy is pretty important. What's kept the market going, of course, has been the unprecedented fiscal and monetary stimulus. And every time the Fed in the United States spoke about injecting more money into the system, the stock market moved up and people got optimistic. But there's a limit, and it doesn't look like there's a limit, but there has to be a limit, and the money is going to run out even in a U.S. election year. So I think reality is going to hit, and the choices that governments make about how much they're going to spend, how they're going to devote their attention to growth, which is the critical thing, will I think distinguish countries that are going to do better and those that aren't. This is not the time for ignoring economic fundamentals. It's a time to get growth going, because that means more employment, economic activity, revenue to government, and eventually an ability to pay off our debts. So we shouldn't take a period of downturn and make it even worse. And that's the big question.
In your view, do you think obviously the United States plays a large role in our economy? I guess we're all in the "it depends" mode right now until after the U.S. election.
Right, absolutely, and there are going to be some major differences if Joe Biden gets elected. I mean, one of them, which will impact on Canada in particular, relates to resource development and green policies. And if Biden is elected, given what he's been saying, this will be a further encouragement, if not license, for Justin Trudeau to move forward with his uneconomic green policies. It'll be harder for him to do that if President Trump is reelected, because the gap between the two countries and the relative uncompetitiveness that would create would be devastating for Canada. So, we're going to be affected by how well they do. The better they do, the better we tend to do. We're also going to be affected by the particular policies they adopt.
We'll have to have you back because this is an expansive topic. But Joe Oliver, thank you for being on our program today.
Great to be with you, Tony. Thanks.
Well, lots of issues and challenges for the new Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland. We'll have Joe Oliver back on a new panel that we'll have on Boom and Bust in the future. These topics are not going to go away. Stay with us. Thank you.